she created me. She made me. So there's no replacement for that.
I'm Sarai, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Before we start, a quick note for listeners. This story mentions abuse, drug use, and contains strong language. It might not be suitable for all listeners, so please take care. Okay, on with the show. Sometimes it can feel like we each carry around two different versions of our childhood. The first version is the memory you made at the time. It's everything that you saw and you felt and you heard when you were actually living it. It's a child's perspective. The second version is the one that comes later when you're an adult. You learn things as you get older, and maybe you have a new way of looking at things. I think this is normal for most of us. But when the adults around you are harboring secrets that are going to blow your life apart one day, these two versions of your childhood can be wildly different. That's what happened to Ashley. Ashley grew up in a small town in the interior of British Columbia, Canada. Her parents met when her mom was working as a cook at a mining camp where her dad was also working. Her mom and dad had a tumultuous relationship, and he was often working up north, operating heavy equipment for gold mines in the Yukon.
But they were writing letters to stay in touch. My dad had written her a letter on a pad of paper, and he had torn off one extra piece of paper that had his to-do list. And one of the things was to write a letter to Carolyn, who was not my mom. So she freaked out and convinced that he was having an affair.
And so Ashley's mom, who was pregnant at the time, decided to leave her dad.
I don't know the exact story, but I think she was driving from where she was living in Merritt to a different place, and she had to turn the car around and go to a hospital and have the baby. So that was my birthday. So pretty dramatic entry to the world.
But Ashley remembers her childhood as a happy and joyful one.
It was fun. There was a lot of fun. So it was very vibrant. Like a lot of kids, so lots of noise and activity always going on. My mom was really vibrant person. She was always singing and dancing and always doing something noisy and laughing and loving and all kinds of just activity always happening in the house and outside of the house. And we always had pets. We always had so many pets, dogs and cats.
Ashley's mom was a dog groomer by trade, so they were always taking in stray animals. She says her mom was a bit of a hippie and a dreamer, always making crafts of all kinds, from leatherwork to macrame to hand-woven wall hangings.
She used to make those kind of things, and I have actually one of the photos I have. I don't have very many from childhood, but one of those photos has one of her hangings in the wall, and I just remember it so clearly. I remember just staring at that thing and touching it. I can still imagine the woolly texture.
When Ashley was born, they lived in a big yellow clapboard house. That's where she spent the earliest part of her childhood with her brothers, mom, and stepdad.
It had a wraparound porch and a big yard. And inside it had this huge wooden staircase. And we would collapse a cardboard box and slide down the staircase and do all kinds of chaotic stuff like that.
She and her brothers were often left to their own devices.
My mom worked all the time, and we got up to all kinds of trouble. My oldest brother had a small shotgun for hunting, and he was babysitting us all the time. He babysat us, and one time he was like, "Okay," and we were really curious about his gun, and he was like, "Okay, I'm going to teach you how to shoot the gun. This is what you're going to do." And he just put the gun barrel down on the floor, and it discharged. And we were like, "Oh my God, you just shot a gun into the house." And then the bullet went down into the basement. So there was a big hole in the floor, and we just covered it with a rug and just thought that that would do it. It was in the middle of the dining room.
Most adults would be horrified to learn that their children were playing with a gun, let alone shooting it in the house. But you can hear the amusement in Ashley's voice as she remembers it from her childhood perspective. Of course, she knows it was dangerous. But to a kid, the big concern was covering up the hole in the floor. There were reasons the kids had so much unsupervised time. Her mom worked multiple jobs, and at night she'd waitress to support the family. Ashley idolized her mom, and she and her brothers always wanted to spend more time with her. One day, when Ashley was still a little kid, her brother came to her with an idea.
He was like, okay, you know how like mom always works at night because she worked at the bar at night. And she always wears like a nice dress to go to work. And here we were looking in her closet, like, here's all her dresses that she wears to go to work. And he was like, if she can't wear these dresses, she can't go to work at night. So we each, I don't know where we got this, we each grabbed a pair of scissors and we just sat down in the floor of the closet under her dresses. So the hems were like touching our heads. And we just sat there with our scissors, like just free. And like the fabric bits were falling. It was so fun. And then it didn't last very long. And then that was a thing that my mom never let go of for the rest of our lives together. Like, she was so mad. And it's funny because like when I look back on it, I'm like, oh man, we didn't know the magnitude of what we were doing there. We would have been like 5 and 6 maybe. And we just wanted more time with her. We didn't know that she had to work. Like it was just, we didn't know. And now as an adult, I'm like, fuck, that would have been really bad. That would have been, that would have felt so awful. That poor lady, she had these kids, but she was so mad at us. We never lived it down.
It wasn't long after this that the family picked up and moved. She remembers the move as being really abrupt. Suddenly, the kids were packed up and moved somewhere completely new, a rural camp on a piece of land her mom and stepdad had purchased. As a child, she didn't question it much. After all, she was only about 6 years old at this point. Suddenly, she just had a new life.
They purchased this huge piece of land. It had 3 lakes. The lakes were called Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And there was a bunch of cabins there, and it was a fishing camp. So people will come and rent a cabin and spend their holiday time like fishing in the lakes and just camping. My mom loved it. Like, she was so happy there, just living off the grid and homesteading. She would catch fish and smoke the fish, and she would preserve all this food. It was a really neat time in my life, really formative for me.
Her mother homeschooled the kids, but like most other things, it was pretty loose and freewheeling.
I think she was distracted by just living that life, and I think she felt really happy there, really fulfilled. So I think she was like, school, whatever, they'll be fine. The kids will be fine, that kind of thing.
She remembers her mom doing a lot of the restoration herself, painting the cabins and doing maintenance. And in the meantime, the kids had a lot of freedom. They all lived together in a tiny cabin with just one bedroom and one other room for the kitchen and dining room.
There was a big bed for my parents, my mom and my stepdad, and then there was a bunk bed for my closest brother and myself. And then my eldest brother slept on the couch in the other room. And at night, my mom would she would read to us out loud, like, just, we would all be in bed and she would just read. And I really remember her reading The Hobbit. Was one of the books that she would read to us. So those memories.
After about a year of living in the fishing camp, the family moved again. They bought a new house, and the dog grooming business began to really take off. Ashley says that not only was her mom highly skilled, but she also had this charisma that just seemed to draw people to her. The grooming business flourished, and after being poor for so long, the family actually started to become wealthy. This was all due to her mom's business. Ashley describes her stepdad is a bit of a deadbeat.
At one point, my mom was working 6 days a week um, at the shop, and then my stepdad like wasn't basically working, and she had to hire a cleaning lady because like she couldn't do it all, and my stepdad didn't do anything. Um, but even then, she was still cooking. She was cooking all of her meals. Again, another thing that she was super great at.
One of the things that attracted people to Ashley's mom was how capable she was. She just seemed to be good at everything.
I idolized her for a long time. She was so capable. She was so confident. She was arrogant. Like, looking back, she was like boastful. Like she would talk about how her singing, like I have such a great singing voice, and or I'm second to none in dog grooming, like nobody's better than me, nobody could be better than me. Yeah, so there was arrogance, but I didn't know at the time when I was a little kid, I didn't know that that was maybe an ugly trait. I just saw it as confidence, and I believed everything she said.
As Ashley headed towards puberty, their relationship became more and more complicated.
She was almost competitive with me. She never missed an opportunity to like cut me down, like, or to compare herself with me, like, oh, when I was your age I was a lot slimmer than you, or no, too bad you don't have a very good singing voice like me, or there was a lot of just digs like that. Yeah, I internalized it, and I believed it, a lot of it. I really took that on and seeded my insecurities that I've been trying to recover from since then.
Ashley tried to be helpful, but it just never seemed like she measured up.
When I wasn't doing things right, it was because I was deficient as a person. And I wasn't allowed to sort of have normal feelings through childhood. I wasn't coached by her. Yeah, so it was complicated, because at the same time, I mean, she was my favorite person in the whole world. I just wanted to be near her. We were always starved for time with her.
Her mom was what Ashley described as a workaholic. It seemed like she was always creating or crafting or working.
It's one part wanting to be, or not wanting to be, idle with her thoughts. I think she really struggled with insecurity. I talked about how she was like quite arrogant and boastful, and I think those were, now that I'm an adult and can see it this way, I think that those were signs of deep, deep insecurity. I think she had a really tumultuous, like, internal life. I feel like just the way she was, I just feel like she was really stormy inside and she could never settle down.
Around this age, Ashley turned to her mom to help her learn how to sew.
But I think I was about 12 or 13. And I started taking home ec at school, and I really liked it and I was interested in it. I knew that she had made a lot of our clothes when we were really little, and she had all the tools. Like, she had sewing machine, she had a big one of those really nice sewing boxes. It's wooden, and it has like the expanding trays that come out. It's like oldie timey kind of sewing box like that. And I used to really enjoy like just exploring all the stuff in there. And I had to get a sewing kit, like a basic sewing kit for school for home ec. And so I remember the trip still. We went to like Fabricland or whatever, and she like helped me pick out all the things. We had the list, and I still have some of the things. So I still have, like, I got one of those round pin, like, set of pins, the brand, unique brand set of pins, and I chose specifically the one with the rainbow colors. I still have like a partial wheel of those, and they don't stick into any fabric. Like, they're the worst. They're the worst pins, but I still have them.
For some reason, when they would sew together, it was one of the few times when Ashley felt really accepted by her mom.
When we were sewing together, like, it was actually one of the activities that we did together that she was not critical of me. Like, I don't remember any real criticism from her in that realm. Like, she gave me the resources and the space to be able to explore that activity as a kid would, you know? Oh, I don't know. I just feel like, that was sort of one of the activities that we shared where she wasn't so critical, she wasn't hard on me, she wasn't competitive with me. She coached me, she gave me some space, she gave me like access to her tools, like, which I now understand is very generous of a woman to give full access of your sewing tools to a teenage girl. And yeah, I would explore, I would make stuff, I would try out, I would alter patterns. Like, I didn't know anything about how to do that, but I just would jump in and do it. And she was sort of there to like point me in the right direction or help me out with things here and there. She was like, she seemed to be so knowledgeable with sewing. Like, I don't think I ever went to her with a question that she didn't know how to answer. Or if I did, it was one of those things where she showed a little bit of humility. She wasn't like all arrogant about it. She was like, well, you know, let's look it up.
But outside of the sewing room, things were getting worse. Her mom's behavior was getting more extreme and more erratic. Ashley knew something was going on, but no one would talk to her about it. It was then that Ashley learned what was really happening, the secret that had been with her family for years. One day, her stepdad made a phone call in front of her and her brothers.
I think he left a voicemail, actually. So he's on the phone. He gets a voicemail and he goes, if you don't stop selling drugs to my wife, I'm going to fucking kill you. And he hung up the phone. And he did that in front of like me and my brothers. And I kind of like looked at him, was like shocked. And he goes, yeah, now you know what's going on.
Coming up, how Ashley survived the next few years of living with her mother's addiction and rediscovered the thing that brought them together.
Everything was sort of falling down around her ears. And it was too much for me to bear.
This podcast is created by the team at Seamwork. We're here to help you design and sew your own wardrobe. You can check out our patterns, classes, and community by visiting us at seamwork.com. If you like the idea of creating your own wardrobe but really struggle with actually making things that you want to wear, check out our free downloadable sewing planner. It's available at seamwork.com/go/planner. It's a totally free printable PDF, and you can use it to help you create a small collection of pieces that fits your style and your real life. It'll help you to define your goals, create a palette, design some looks, and then create a queue of projects to sew. Just visit seamwork.com/go/planner, enter your email address, and then we'll send it to you right away. We'll also send you a series of emails that gives you some tips and actually helps walk you through using the planner. So again, that URL is seamwork.com/go/planner, or just check for the link in the show notes. Ashley grew up with a strong, free-spirited mother who filled her childhood with creativity. But as she became a teenager, their relationship darkened, and it seemed that Ashley was just never good enough to please her mom. As her mother's behavior became more and more strange, Ashley learned the truth. Her mother had been living with addiction for years, and it was getting worse. It turned out the drug went back years and years. It stretched back to before the time they left the big yellow house for life at that rural fishing camp.
What I learned after the fact was that the reason they bought this fishing camp was because they needed to clean up. They needed to leave the city and their acquaintances and all the drugs and alcohol, and just like detach from society to get clean. That was what they decided to do.
It turned out that her mother was addicted to cocaine, and her stepdad was more into heroin. And while Ashley had no idea about this at the time, that was the reason for her idyllic time living on the lake. Her mother had wanted to get clean.
What I learned later on in life was that we actually, and I remember the night, so we were They packed us up into, we had this little pickup truck with a canopy on the back. They put a mattress in the back of the truck for us, and this was at nighttime. And us three kids got in the back, and with like blankets and pillows, and it was kind of like exciting and cozy. And then we drove all night, and we went. We ended up at this fishing camp, which now that I say that, it wasn't driving all night, but as a little kid, it feels like we drove all night. It was probably like an hour and a half drive. um, and then we never went back to that house, that big yellow house, because I guess they were like foreclosing. Like the bank was foreclosing on that house. My mom had lost the house, and I guess the only way out was to do a runner, they felt. So that's exactly what they did. And so, uh, yeah, we just basically had a bag of clothes and ran away.
Now that Ashley was aware of what was happening, she understood better why her mom's behavior could change so dramatically. At times, she would get clean and stay clean for weeks, but it would never last. And when she was back to using, it was pretty obvious.
When she was using, she would be like deeply paranoid to the point where she would accuse us of, I don't know, spying on her or conspiring with some of her like drug associates, to like embarrass her or undermine her or steal from her or just whatever. Any idea that she had, there was some kind of conspiracy that was happening.
The paranoia didn't stop there. She became obsessed with her kids' physical safety.
Like she was obsessed with the idea that my younger brother and me were being sexually abused. So she would ask me constantly. It was really disturbing. She would ask me constantly if anybody had been touching me or if I was having sex for money or if people were giving me drugs, if people were making me have sex with them, like just a constant. And then at some points it got to the point where she would actually keep us awake all night sometimes because she was so paranoid that if she left us in a dark room that somebody would sneak in and molest us. So she would, first of all, she would make my little brother and me sleep together if she was letting us sleep. So we would sleep in my room because I had a big bed. And then she would come in and shine flashlights on our faces all the time. It was like psychological, like warfare. It was crazy. It was torture. Yeah, it was abuse for sure. And it was scary for us because that, like, paranoia is contagious. So you start thinking like that something is happening. You start questioning what's real for you. Because she would ask me these questions about who was touching you last night. I heard something in your bedroom. I, no, nobody, nothing. What are you talking about? And then it was like, well, did something happen? Like, what am I? It was this really strange thing. And as a kid, like, you're so influential.
Listening to Ashley, you get the sense that she saw her mom as almost a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Her face would change too. If like I could see at a glance if she was like doped up because the way she held her face was completely different. She looked like a different person. Just this really intense, like tension in her face and the way that she would look. Like the eyes were so piercing and so just intense and yeah, just really different, just night and day. Whereas when she was cleaning, she was so happy. She was always like joking around and laughing and singing. You know, a really free spirit and a really like warm person, super charismatic, a really nice and generous person too. Yeah, she was great. Like all my friends loved her. Like all my friends always wanted to come over.
At the same time, Ashley was forbidden to talk about what was going on with anyone.
And it was like all wrapped up in shame. We weren't allowed to talk about it. We weren't allowed to, um, yeah, we weren't allowed to talk to our friends or anyone at school or anything, she would say that social services would come and separate us. That was always a thing. So, yeah, she was really ashamed and scared that we would be taken away from her.
When Ashley was around 14, things got worse than ever. Her mother's business was starting to fail, and she'd stopped making mortgage payments.
Everything was sort of falling down around her ears, and it was too much for me to bear anymore. But again, I hadn't been allowed to talk to anybody about it, so nobody knew what was going on. I was missing so much school because she would be keeping us up all night. She would go to work in the morning, and we would stay home from school and sleep. And so my little brother and I weren't going to school, but nobody was like looking into what might be going on.
Ashley stayed with a friend and her family for a little while. Eventually, her friend's mom started asking about Ashley's dad.
So I remember her kind of like asking questions about my dad. And in hindsight, I now realize that she was prodding for like information to like help her find him. And she did. She found him and she talked to him and she was like, "What is going on?"
For most of her life, Ashley hadn't had much of a relationship with her father. Partly it was because her mom didn't want her to, and partly it was because her dad, by his own admission, just wasn't really mature enough to be a father. But about a year before Ashley left her mom's house, her dad had begun to reconnect with her.
He reconnected with us when I was about 13. And so things were pretty bad at home. Like they weren't rock bottom, but they were not stable. And the reason he reconnected with us was because he got into a relationship with my now stepmom, who was the woman from the to-do list that my mom had been mailed on my birthday or around my birthday.
Yeah, remember the scrap of paper her mom had found with a woman's name on it? That was one of the main reasons her mom had left her dad on the day Ashley was born. Now Ashley's dad and that same woman were together in a long term relationship. She also had a child, so they'd formed a family together.
She was like, "What do you mean you don't have a relationship with your children?" And he was like, "Well, it's been too hard." And she's like, "Okay, look, we're a family now. So we're having a relationship with those children. Like, we're doing it. I don't care if it's hard. They're your children." So she pursued it, and she she facilitated us reconnecting. But I didn't know, or I didn't have the comfort level to ask them for help, and they didn't know what was going on because, again, I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody about what was going on, and so I hadn't told them.
Her friend's mom finally managed to get a hold of her dad.
Like, "Your daughter's living in my house. Like, is she safe? Like, what is going on with her mom? What's the situation?" And this was all new to him. And as it turns out, he was trying to get in touch with us and he couldn't find us because the phone had been cut off. And, he couldn't get a hold of my mom. He couldn't get a hold of me or my brother. And so when when my friend's mom got in touch with him, like they were super relieved that I was okay, because they didn't know.
Ashley finished out the school year with financial help from her dad and then left to go live with him, her stepmom, and her stepbrother near Vancouver. This was a big adjustment for her. Life wasn't perfect, but things were stable. She was taken care of and loved and provided for, but she still had a lot to process.
I was really traumatized though. I had been I had been through so much, and they didn't know the half of it because I wouldn't talk about it. Um, and I was scared because I didn't know if I would be allowed to stay. Which, as an adult and now as a parent, especially, I understand how like out to lunch that is. But I genuinely was afraid that I was going to be too big a burden to bear.
But as Ashley grew older, she became more and more well adjusted.
What's remarkable about all of this is that all of us, myself and my brothers, we're all so stable considering what happened to us. We're so stable, we're so successful. And we're working on being closer, it takes work because we just didn't have, the regular kind of upbringing, but we're all trying and it's good. It's really good.
Meanwhile, her relationship with her mom remains spotty and pretty troubled.
I think it was in about 2005 she was diagnosed as HIV positive, because of the intravenous drug use and presumptive needle sharing, though she never admitted it. After that, she got access to some supports for people living with HIV. And so she was able to get like a disability pension. She was able to get government supported housing. And so some pieces of her life really were able to stick together.
For the next 5 years, her mom continued to go through periods of using and getting clean. But things came to a head again in 2010 when Ashley was about to get married.
It was like I was um, detaching because I was trying to build my own life at that point. So I was detaching from her, and she felt that and started to really like cling even harder and inject herself even more like into my life. And we kind of came to a boiling point. That emotional abuse, it never really went away. She still treated me like I was a 13-year-old insecure, you know, girl who she could manipulate and break down. And yeah, I wasn't that anymore.
After attempting to fix the relationship, eventually Ashley realized she just needed to cut ties. For about 6 years, they were estranged. But after not speaking for all this time, Ashley began to consider allowing her mom back into her life.
I had just sort of closed some chapters in my life. I had finished my master's degree. I had changed jobs from a job that I was pretty unhappy with for a few years to a job that I was really thriving in. And so a lot of things were going really well for me. And I had just started to turn my mind to, okay, maybe I should re-engage my mom and see if we can have a relationship. Like, you know, would that be the worst thing in the world? And and so I had just been toying with that, and unfortunately, I got a call from my eldest brother. It was Easter Sunday, 2017, and he said, "I'm really sorry, but Mom passed away today." And I said, "What the fuck?" and and yeah, it was true. And I felt like part of me almost thought like that she would never die, like that she would outlive us all. She was so tenacious.
Ashley says that what she felt most was the waste of opportunity, the opportunity for their relationship to have been different.
I guess I wished it hadn't been like that. I wished it hadn't been like that. I don't regret having made the decision to let go of her in my life, um, or let go of her from my life, I guess is a better way to say it. But it still is hard. It was a hard decision. She created me. She made me. So there's no replacement for that. And I felt the loss of her. I mourned for the good things that I had with her too. Like the bonding like we had with the sewing and that kind of stuff.
She remembered sewing together as respite from criticism. It was the time her mother had found it within her to instill confidence and security in her daughter.
It was one of the very few activities that we could do together where I would feel good about myself doing that. And I didn't feel cut down, and I didn't feel degraded, and I didn't feel criticized.
After her death, Ashley needed to help sort through some of her mom's things. Her mom had been living part time in an apartment with a roommate and part time on a sailboat.
Of course, like she had this like manky sailboat that didn't even have a mast, and it was just moored here. And she had some stuff on there, including a crafting area, which is crazy on this tiny liveaboard sailboat, with this enormous cast iron sewing machine, this like teal blue Kenmore zigzag machine. And I don't know. I just like a part of me was not surprised at all to find that on her sailboat. Like she was just so funny. She had she wanted to do something, she would just do it, you know. There was some other crafting stuff too. Like there was some quite a lot of yarn. It looked like she'd been knitting and crocheting some stuff. There was a little bit of leather, like it looked like she'd been making some slippers or something. Like there was some shearling, and there was kind of like all these callbacks to like all this stuff that she used to do. So she was still doing it, you know, like she was still creating right up until the day she died.
Ashley decided to take that big blue Kenmore sewing machine. She'd been toying with the idea of getting back into sewing for a while.
I had always wanted to come back into it because I really enjoyed it. And there I had a sewing machine. So I was like, well, I'm gonna give this a go. And I was grieving. And um yeah, it was a way to reconnect to mom and something creative and productive, and like a mindfulness practice too, you know. With sewing, it's so like that. You have to be, you know, very like into the machine and the fabric and everything that's going on. So really like a valuable sort of therapeutic practice, I think.
With her mom's sewing machine at home now, Ashley started to look through some of her old things, including the projects she'd saved that she and her mom had created together.
Yeah, I looked at that stuff again, like, and was so really impressed with like myself and with her to like have created these things together. So it wasn't easy stuff. Like I was ambitious when it came to like pattern choices in those early days. Like I didn't see the limitations, you know. Like I was just like, well, like you just buy the pattern, buy the fabric that it tells you, and then you just like make it. I was really like, I wanted to jump into stuff like that.
Sewing together was just about the only time that Ashley remembers her mom instilling this confidence in her. She really felt like she could do it when it came to sewing. She felt supported.
I'd gone through like like all my craft stuff to pick out some of those old sewing tools, and I found like, you know, that set of pins that I had, and some buttons that I had bought, and I like remember a lot of the trips to the fabric store and all that kind of stuff. And
Recently, Ashley recalled a trip that she took to the local fabric store.
there was a girl there. She was about like probably 13 or 14. She was there with her mom, and it was so familiar. She was like, hey, she had her pattern in hand. She was like store, like looking around for the stuff, and mom was a few paces back, like giving her the space to lead. And um and then but then she would turn around, like the girl would she would turn around sometimes and be like, mom, what the pattern says blah blah blah, like what do I, you know, what does this mean when it's like, and then the mom would step in and like offer a little guidance. And it was just so familiar. I saw myself, and I like stopped in my tracks and like watched them for a few minutes, like really fondly, you know, just remembering what that was like.
Today, Ashley has her own 1-year-old son, and he loves to watch her sew. What she wants to give him more than anything else is this unconditional support that she really missed growing up. No matter who he is or what his interests are, she wants to be there for him. I asked her if passing down these creative skills is really important to her.
Yeah, I do. And more importantly than that, though, um, and my husband and I talk about this, is that it's more important for us to be able to coach him in finding what are the outlets that are important to him, and what are the outlets that are going to be fulfilling to him. And if he's a creative person, then like, yeah, we will foster that. Like we will provide you the opportunities to fulfill creative aspirations. So I joke with I joke a lot with my husband. Like my husband's super active. Like he's into rock climbing and motorcycles and all this stuff. And um, he always says things like, "Oh well, when Milo, my son's name is Milo, when Milo's older, like, and we can do like dirt biking stuff." And I'm like, "Well, what if he doesn't want to?" And he's like, "Well, maybe." And I'm like, "What if he wants to work on his fall collection with mommy?"
It's this kind of unconditional acceptance that she wants to give her son. It's a feeling of being enough, just as you are. That was what was missing from Ashley's own childhood. The thing her mother just couldn't give her, except in those rare moments, like when they were sewing together. I asked Ashley if she could go back and talk to her mom now, what would she say? And it turns out she'd give her mom the same message she wants to teach her own son. It's really the message we all need to hear, so that we can give it to others too.
I would just probably try to convey to her that she's good enough. Like, just relax, You're good enough, you're loved, and you're acceptable for who you are. And you're only human, and you're a good person. And stop being so hard on yourself.
That was Ashley, and you can find her on the Seamwork community as Ashley B at community.seamwork.com. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by us, the people behind Seamwork. It's also brought to you by our community, and we want to thank everyone who chooses to share their story. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We're always looking for diverse stories, and we'd especially love to share stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram @Seamwork, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Seamwork Video on YouTube. And we'd love to invite you to join our community at seamwork.com. When you become part of the Seamwork community, you really don't have to go it alone on your sewing adventure. You get new patterns and video classes each month to help you make your own wardrobe. We even have an unlimited plan that gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 sewing patterns. Podcast listeners get 50% off the unlimited plan by visiting seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. One more thing. If you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sarai Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.